Kim doing this, it's not you. You would not be okay with it.
Wouldn't I?
I've always been fascinated by the culpability of an accomplice, someone that may not commit the crime themselves but serves as an assistant to the perpetrator. And there's a whole spectrum of involvement here. Maybe they encourage it, maybe they physically help, maybe they just don't prevent it, or help cover up the evidence. Now, legally speaking, they're considered just as guilty, but morally, we tend to condemn them less than the actual perpetrator. As while they obviously serve a role, they're not the star of the show, meaning they probably wouldn't be involved in the crime at all unless the offender pulled them into their vortex. So with that in mind, what do you think of Kim Wexler? Would you trust her? Would you go as far as to call her a good person? At the start of Better Call Saul, she appears to be someone with a strong moral compass who follows the law, and not just to avoid getting in trouble, but because she genuinely has a sense of right and wrong. However, over the course of the show, we see her standards slip, and she becomes not just aware of Jimmy's shady behavior, but an active participant in it. She could have put a stop to it at any time, or even turned him over to the authorities, but she doesn't.
Because I was having too much fun.
So let's take a deeper look at the questionable actions of Kim Wexler over the course of Better Call Saul, to see if we can determine whether or not, on balance, she's a good person. The first key is how she enables Jimmy. It's always easier to fall back into a role you've already played than to suddenly start fresh later in life. So Kim isn't just drawn to Jimmy because he's charming and tells funny stories. She's also immune to judging him because of how she was raised. Just like Jimmy, Kim's mother was also unreliable and prone to making bad choices. And although she would try to set standards of how to behave, like not getting into her car when she's been drinking, this also meant that she became accustomed to protecting people close to her regardless of what they've done wrong. Despite being the child, she's taking care of her own mother here, and when she tries to lash out by shoplifting earrings, an act that should turn the tables and guarantee discipline, her mother only pretends to be angry in front of the shop manager and then lets her keep the earrings she stole, even telling her to relax because she got away with it. Now, if her mother had punished her and explained why she let her down as well as herself, then her conscience would start to align with her mother's guidance. But instead, she never had any boundaries imposed on her, leaving it up to her to determine what was right and wrong. And as a knock-on effect, she's now used to becoming close to bad actors who need someone to help them get off the hook. This served her well in her legal career, as Kim is great at not judging her clients and trying to get them the best deal with minimal punishment. But it also makes her more susceptible to growing attached to people with questionable morals. So when it comes to Jimmy, Kim adopts a familiar caretaker role, where she's the one to keep him in line whenever he strays. Their dynamic is that Jimmy tests the boundary and then Kim reinforces it. For example, in the very second episode, when Jimmy calls her late at night, she states up front that there will be no dirty talk. When he puts up that billboard impersonating Howard, she warns him that he's playing with fire. When he quits his job, she tries to talk him out of it. When he tells her he fabricated evidence to help get his client off the hook, she tells him she can never hear about this sort of thing again. And when he's warned not to solicit clients for the Sandpiper case, she refuses to play footsie with him under the table until he reasserts that it won't happen again. She's essentially training him, disincentivizing bad behavior. And although Kim shouldn't have to be the one to parent Jimmy, she wants the best for him. And if he'd just followed her advice from the beginning, he would have ended up much better off. But rather than Kim turning Jimmy towards the light, instead he found a way to activate her dark side. On some level, Kim must crave chaos. That's why she's drawn to tumultuous characters. And given she has to play the grown-up both at work and at home, it's only natural that sometimes she just wants to rebel and unleash that chaotic part of herself. So when Jimmy shows her how to pull a somewhat innocent scam against the stockbroker Ken, where they essentially swindle someone who already has a lot of money into buying unexpectedly expensive drinks for them all night, she enjoys finally being able to break the rules instead of enforcing them. The show depicts this as harmless fun, and technically not stealing as Ken offers to pay for the drinks, but he only does so under false pretenses, so it is fraud. And while it is easier to justify taking money from someone who doesn't need it than someone who can barely afford to live, in the end it is still wrong. Jimmy and Kim have no right to Ken's money, and it's not like they're swindling his cash to give to the poor. It's all just for their benefit. But now that she's participated once, the seed is planted, and like any addiction, it grows. Whenever she's feeling powerless, this is what helps her to blow off steam. However, to her credit, Kim doesn't give in to it fully. For instance, when she swindles a 10 grand check out of an engineer, she never cashes it, just keeps it as a trophy. So she does have some limits, and we consistently see her try to regulate Jimmy's behavior. He always pushes for more, and she always reins him back in. But it's attritional. When Jimmy pushes for 100, she only reins him in 80, so he's always making ground. And then the more he needs her to get him out of trouble, the more she's willing to bend the rules to protect him.
You confessed to a felony on tape. I'm there. You have a bar hearing? I represent you. Over and over again.
In this sense, Kim is blatantly enabling Jimmy, just like her mother enabled her by never providing strong enough boundaries. Except unlike Kim, Jimmy never knows when to stop. So the cycle is allowed to repeat, growing in intensity each time as he knows she'll always stand by him when he does wrong and sometimes even lie on his behalf. The real test is this: if Kim was a truly moral character, she would walk away once Jimmy's behavior becomes too dangerous. But when that time comes, she marries him instead, as husbands and wives cannot be forced to testify against one another. So while this might just seem like a smart move to protect herself as well as their relationship, it also communicates that she tacitly approves of his decisions. She's complicit. Which leads us into the second key, playing legal games. While defending criminals is part and parcel of being a lawyer, Kim is willing to go above and beyond, as long as she's defending Jimmy. For instance, when we look at the Chuck situation, although he had always professionally obstructed his younger brother at every turn, Jimmy is technically the one who committed the original sin of changing the address on Chuck's paperwork. He is guilty of forgery and fraud, and could therefore lose his license to practice law. But because he only did all of this to help Kim get Mesa Verde as a client, as much as she's angry at him for putting her in this spot, she doesn't choose to do what's right and present the truth to her clients to let them decide. Instead, she lies for Jimmy, backing his story that Chuck just made a mistake and is too arrogant to admit it. And then as revenge for him entrapping Jimmy into breaking and entering and destroying property, she helps Jimmy to hire a fraudulent handyman to fix Chuck's door so they can get photos inside his house, and then try to psychologically break him on the stand. Equally ruthless, except Jimmy is actually guilty.
As far as I'm concerned, all we did was tear down a sick man.
However, Kim does feel tremendous guilt for what she's done to Chuck, to the point she ends up trying to give back the money HHM paid for her tuition, as on some level that means that Chuck paid for the education that she used to bury his reputation, and that doesn't sit right with her. Then when his bodyguard Huel gets arrested for assaulting a police officer, as always, Jimmy comes to Kim for help. She initially sets the boundary that she's not going to tear down a cop's reputation to help get him off, as that was Jimmy's original idea. But after she hears Jimmy being referred to as a scumbag disbarred lawyer peddling drop phones to criminals, and sensing he might do something stupid to help Huel skip town to avoid the charges, she comes up with a solution, painting Huel as a saint with a large church community supporting him who will turn this trial into a circus. It's hard to say if this is particularly immoral. On the one hand, the prosecutors are trying to put Huel away for an unjust level of jail time, and she's not falsifying evidence or breaking the law. She's just making the prosecution worry about the media spotlight that could be thrust upon the case. But on the other hand, Huel is technically guilty of the crime he was accused of. And once her plan succeeds, she feels that same high she got from her previous scams and now really has a taste for it.
Let's do it again.
While you could hand-wave all of this away as just helping the little guy up until now, she then scams City Hall into granting her client a larger premises to build their bank on. And then when that same bank tried to kick Mr. Acker out of his home so they could build their call center, Kim starts to hate how little the powerful care about anything but growth, so decides to be a thorn in their side by getting Jimmy to represent Acker and continuously wasting Mesa Verde's time and money. While this may feel good, and on some level justified, legally speaking, the bank has done nothing wrong here. She's paid to be their bodyguard, yet here she is plotting their assassination behind their backs. She's a traitor. Mesa Verde have been nothing but good to Kim, sticking with her when she needed them the most, but now she's reflexively rebelling against them. Yes, she pulls back from the brink before Jimmy goes all in on Kevin, but she's the one who started this. She's beyond culpable. Now, if you're being generous, you could look at this as if Kim is some sort of legal vigilante, fighting for what's right, even if it means doing what's wrong. But then how do you justify the final key? Torturing Howard. We all have people who rub us the wrong way, who no matter what they do, just irritate us beyond belief. But Howard was never the villain that Kim and Jimmy wanted him to be. Yes, he was a nepo baby. Yes, he let Chuck use him as a puppet. And yes, he punished Kim for Jimmy's wrongdoing when he screwed up at Davis and Maine. But what Jimmy and Kim do to him in response is sociopathic. It took months of planning and coordination. Now, to paint him as a drug user who takes advantage of hookers is one thing. It's obviously not right, but you could see why defaming someone like this could be seen as a dark joke. But to gaslight and sabotage him in front of everyone involved in the Sandpiper case is something else. Howard was already struggling to live with himself ever since Chuck's death. His marriage was on the rocks, his business was in trouble. And yet here Kim is, sacrificing actual career opportunities, just so she can prioritize watching Howard's demolition. These are not normal instincts. As fun as it is to watch, if you found out that two people you knew put in this much effort to try destroy you behind your back, you'd rightly think they're not just bad people, but totally insane. Now, Kim and Jimmy may justify to themselves that this will just be a career setback for Howard, nothing more. After being groomed for success his whole life, now he can see how it feels to be unfairly targeted and restrained. But really, they destroy his reputation, putting his job in jeopardy, which leads to him being at the wrong place at the wrong time, so he ends up a victim of Lalo Salamanca. All of a sudden, their fun and games aren't so fun anymore. Which highlights another crucial difference between Kim and Jimmy. After Howard's death, although Kim was willing to lie to Howard's wife, manufacturing a story about seeing him using drugs in the office one night, when it comes down to it, Kim has the moral wherewithal to identify she has no business being a lawyer given what she's done. So she steps away from the law and abandons her relationship as she now sees that she and Jimmy are toxic for one another. Now, it would be easy to say that Jimmy is the one who corrupted Kim, as he went on to commit far worse crimes as his career progressed. But let's not forget that Kim helped him to find new creative ways to cover up for clients. She helped him to justify his actions and put him in a position to do real harm. Without her, Jimmy would never have been able to become Saul Goodman, as he would have crashed and burned at one of the many obstacles she helped him overcome. As although she eventually chose to confess and clearly feels remorse for what she's done, it's definitely a case of too little too late, as she chose to protect herself and Jimmy when it mattered most. She was his accomplice through and through, aiding and abetting him every step of the way. So where does Kim Wexler stand by the end of the series? I'd say she's clearly not as guilty as Jimmy, but still more easily corrupted than the likes of Skyler. She's definitely not the standard definition of an upstanding citizen, as she's only really trustworthy as long as you're in her good books or she doesn't need something from you. But as sociopathic as some of her behavior appears in the cold light of day, at least she does have limits. If she were truly morally bankrupt, she would have stayed by Jimmy's side throughout all of Breaking Bad, finding new ways to cover up, justify, and manipulate. But instead, the moment someone she knew got hurt, she disarmed herself, packed up the life she once knew, and started over from nothing. And while it's easy to assume that she would have stayed on the straight and narrow if Jimmy had never opened his passenger door, she still chose to get in the car, and there were even points where she was the one driving and Jimmy was telling her to slow down. So while Kim does get credit for restraining her worst impulses before they fully spiraled out of control, most honest actors wouldn't let it go that far to begin with. But I suppose, given she was never taught real boundaries, she was always left to just make it up as she went along. So she followed her own confused moral compass until something happened that finally hammers home that actions have consequences. And the closer you fly to the sun, the further you'll have to fall. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.